Since we recorded this episode, Donald Trump has gone even further in the trade war with China, raising tariffs even higher to 125%, while pausing them for most other countries. We now await China's response. Have a listen. China versus the US. It feels like now is the time to call it a full-scale trade war, with President Trump slapping tariffs of more than 100% on goods imported from China, and China has now retaliated, saying the situation has dangerously escalated. On this Sky News Daily, what does it all mean for the rest of us? Hello, I'm Mark Austin, and this is the Sky News Daily. We started the day working out what China's next move would be after Donald Trump's 104% tariff on China kicked in. Now we know the reaction. China will put an 84% tariff on US imports from tomorrow. If it's not a trade war between the world's two biggest economies yet, it is certainly starting to feel like one. We'll be speaking to Victor Gao on this episode. He's vice president of a Chinese think tank in Beijing, the Center for China and Globalisation, and we'll be asking him about what he makes of it all. But first, our business correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan. Gurpreet, just first of all, explain how we got here. The two largest economies in the world now effectively in a trade war.
It's worth bearing in mind that when Trump first came to power during his first presidency, US tariffs on Chinese exports, so Chinese goods coming into the US, they weren't much higher than they were for the rest of the world. However, throughout both his presidencies, he's steadily been ratcheting up tariffs on Chinese exports. The first time round, it was a limited affair, and Biden, through his administration, retained many of those tariffs that Trump had implemented. But this time round, he's really gone for it, amping up the pressure on China. He introduced a 10% tariff in February within months of coming into power again. And then in March, another 10%. And that was before Liberation Day. So last Wednesday, when he implemented a 34% retaliatory tariff onto China. And China, well, it hit back. It's got to the point where the US tariff on Chinese goods, just in the past few months, has gone up to 104%. And when you add it all together, it's 124%. And at that level, you're effectively shutting down trade. Both economies saying, we don't want to do trade with each other.
Right. And just give us a sense of the nature, in good times, the nature of the trade between the US and China.
So the main gripe that Donald Trump has with China is the country's trade surplus with the US. It basically means that China is sending way more goods to the US than it receives back from the US. And what we've seen is throughout the 1990s and the 2000s, China became this massive exporting powerhouse. After it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, Beijing liberalized the economy, reformed the economy, and we saw exports being driven out into the world economy, including the US, things like toys and appliances and electronics. And it means now that the US has a massive trade deficit with China. Donald Trump is trying to close that.
Right. And who wins this, do you think? Or is it as many people are saying, a lose-lose situation?
Well, to be honest, there are really hard to find winners in all of this. Beijing is talking tough, saying we're not as reliant on the US market as we used to be. That is true. Chinese goods going directly to the US, the chart is going down over time. However, what that doesn't factor in is all the goods that China has been diverting to other Asian countries like Vietnam, for example, and then sending them to the US. And Donald Trump, he's wised up to that. He's closing down those routes by imposing pretty high tariffs on countries throughout Asia. So this is undoubtedly going to hurt Chinese exporters. It's going to harm the economy. It's going to hurt GDP. But it's also going to hurt US exporters as well. Things like soybeans, for example. They send billions and billions of dollars worth of goods to China. And it's ultimately the US consumers who are going to get hurt the most, because they're the ones who are purchasing Chinese goods. And there aren't easy and ready substitutes available for some of this stuff. It means prices will be going up. So it's really hard to see who the winners are going to be in this.
Right. And if no one backs down, what do you think the impact will be for the rest of us? What will the impact be globally?
Well, when the US economy suffers a downturn, when the US economy catches a cold, we all sneeze. These are the two biggest economies in the world. When demand suffers in these countries, when inflation goes up in these countries, that affects all of us. And that means countries across the world, including here in the UK, will be affected by that slowdown.
On world markets, I mean, we're seeing they're all over the place, frankly, but there is the trend is definitely down. There have been some big falls in different parts of the world. Does this continue, do you think? Do world markets get very nervous about all this?
Yeah, there's something really interesting going on in the financial markets. And perhaps unsurprisingly, this has started off as a trade war, but it's not going to stay a trade war. It's turning into a financial war as well. Investors, what we've been seeing, have been selling stocks. They're nervous about the prospects for company earnings, prospects for economic growth. They've been pulling their money out of stocks and they've been buying government bonds, traditionally a safe haven. If you're worried, you want to park your money in things like government bonds. But over the past couple of days, something quite interesting has been happening. Investors, they've been selling stocks, but they're also selling US government bonds, traditionally a safe haven for investors. And why are they doing that? Well, there have been some suggestions that the safe haven status of US treasuries is now being challenged by the financial markets. And we're seeing that in the fate of the dollar as well, which has also been suffering falls. And then other signs of market dysfunction as well. So investors are having to plug holes in their portfolios where they're suffering losses. And that means they're selling bonds, which are quite easy to sell because they need to dash for cash. And that's something we saw during the pandemic as well in 2020. And it means that the Federal Reserve and central banks across the world will be keeping a really close eye on this because they may need to step in.
Well, that's interesting. When you say step in, what is it that the Federal Reserve can actually do? I assume play with interest rates.
Play with interest rates, inject liquidity into the financial markets, grease the wheels of the markets, if you like, to encourage lending and borrowing throughout the market. Because on the one hand, there are clear and obvious signs that this could be recessionary. And you've got economists who are ripping up their forecasts saying that the odds of a US recession have increased. That's going to weigh on the US dollar. But then we're also seeing investors respond to the risk of inflation. When inflation goes up, that means interest rates typically go up, and that normally sends currencies higher. And we've been seeing this sort of back and forth with the dollar as investors are trying to figure out what's going to happen. And when you have that mix of low economic growth, potentially a recession, but also high inflation, it's really difficult for anyone to calibrate the correct response, whether that's investors in the financial markets, but also central bankers.
And you mentioned recession there. What are the chances, do you think, of, an increased chance of recession in America, I assume, but also a global recession?
That's right. And as we were saying, when America suffers a downturn, the whole global economy suffers. You've got some economists saying that the risks of a US recession have gone up from 35% to 45% to 65%. The truth is that these are all forecasts. They're not wholly reliable. And that's because we don't know where policy is going to go. But there's no doubt that tariffs to this extent are very likely to hurt the US economy, potentially plunging it into a recession. And if that happens in the US, then the odds of the rest of the world catching a cold from that increase as well.
Gurpreet Narwan, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Mark. Nice to chat.
Now to the perspective of China. And as I said, Victor Gao is the vice president of a Chinese think tank, the Center for China and Globalisation in Beijing. China has hit back today. Is it determined not to give in?
China will not give in. And China is doing the right thing of retaliating against such unreasonable, unjustified tariffs launched by the United States in such a total global trade war. And China will not be the first to blink, in my best judgment. So the question is, who is going to be the first to blink? It's not going to be China. So you need to guess which country will blink first.
So in that case, you think this is a trade war that China will win?
I don't think there will be any winner. But if you compare which country is doing the right thing, which country is doing the wrong thing, I think the choice is very obvious. China is fast being recognized as a major force of stability, and the other country is fast being considered as a disruptive force, throwing all the rules out of the window and try to dominate against many other countries, including the totality of Europe, which is completely surprising. And I think by the end of the day, regardless of whether you lose more or lose less, it is whether you are doing the right thing or not.
Well, it's America's point that you're not always doing the right thing, and that if you're not breaking the rules, you're breaking the spirit of the rules. Do you think he has a point?
I think you really need to read between the lines. All these false accusations, the accusations about the fentanyl, for example, China now declared China has not sold any fentanyl to North America for quite a few years. So what's the basis of such false accusation? What's the basis for such wanton and reckless, irresponsible tariffs against the totality of the world?
Well, the basis, they say, is that China has been flooding the West with cheaper mass manufactured goods and avoiding tariffs by selling to countries like Vietnam, they say, Mexico, they say, who then sell on to the US with low or no tariffs. So you're effectively avoiding whatever tax is there.
Again, these are false accusations. I think you are dealing with such a president who really doesn't care about the legitimate interests of the other countries and can launch false accusation one after another, regardless of the realities on the ground. Over the past 46 years, China is the major country defending free trade and developing economic situations in China, uplifting more than 800 million people out of poverty. This is a reality which everyone should know.
The US Commerce Secretary would probably laugh at that. I mean, he's saying the problem is China's unfair trade practices, preferential treatment for state enterprises in China, data restrictions, inadequate enforcement of intellectual property rights, cyber theft. Do you accept at all, Victor, that China needs to play more fairly when it comes to trade?
I think the Commerce Secretary really need to go back to school to study the realities and to enrich himself with knowledge about what China is and why China has developed so rapidly. China developed so rapidly because it got its policy right. Mr. Secretary, let me tell you, development is the hard truth for the United States. Develop.
Right.
That's the only way out.
I suppose Donald Trump would answer that by saying, well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to rebuild the United States as a manufacturing superpower. Do you think what he's doing will work?
No, because if he really wants to recreate manufacturing jobs in the United States, rather than using tariff as a weapon, the United States need to build up roads, build up power stations, improve their power transmission capabilities, increasing power generation in the United States, retrain their workforce, for example, and manage their union relations much better and create a pro-business environment. The United States can learn from China as to how to increase and improve its manufacturing capabilities rather than viewing China as an enemy, because that's the wrong way.
Donald Trump said just a few hours ago that countries are calling up. Many countries are calling up. He used the phrase kissing my ass. Would China ever do that?
China will never do that. And that is the most demeaning thing for a president of a country to say about his counterparts in other countries. Therefore, I think President Trump should really learn how to be a better president for the United States. And the United States has always claimed to be the leader of so many countries or of the world, as they claim. Try to be a better leader rather than throwing huge wedges into other countries, try to break their spirit and claiming victory, whereas there is no victory, because such activities will only create resentment, especially among its allies. I think President Trump and his people around him really need to know what they are doing. They are wrecking the order in the world, whereas China is protecting the order in the world. We need free trade rather than dominant trade dictating terms to other countries.
Just finally, Victor, how does this play out? Do you think it's inevitable there will be talks? Will Donald Trump and President Xi get on the phone at some stage and sort this out?
There are lots of channels of communication between Beijing and Washington, D.C. I will not be surprised if dialogue continues, even at this very difficult time. However, to talk to China, you need to treat China as an equal, rather than try to imagine and indulge in the fantasy that you are stronger than China. You can push China around. China needs to be treated as an equal, completely as an equal, before we can have meaningful dialogue between Washington and Beijing.
Victor Gao, appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we go, we have a favour to ask. We'd love to know a bit more about what you like and don't like about our podcasts. If you've got a spare 5 minutes, you can let us know via the survey link in the podcast description. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.